The rain drummed against the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Chapel as mourners filed past the polished mahogany casket. Dr. Harrison Vale, founder and principal of the prestigious Vale Academy chain, lay in eternal rest, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. At least, that is what the obituary claimed. Sarah Chen sat in the very last pew, her fingers nervously smoothing the fabric of her only black dress. She shouldn't have come. She knew that, but something deeper than logic had compelled her to drive 3 hours from her small apartment to attend the funeral of a man who had never spoken to her directly. Not once in the 2 years she had worked as a substitute teacher at his flagship school. The chapel was a monument to wealth and influence. Vale Academy's board members occupied the front rows, their faces appropriately solemn beneath designer suits and Hermes scarves. Behind them sat current faculty members, all permanent positions, all people who belonged in Dr. Vale's world in ways Sarah never could. She had tried to blend in, tried to make herself invisible, but her presence felt like an intrusion. The other teachers barely acknowledged her existence during her substitute assignments. She was the woman who appeared when someone called in sick, taught from lesson plans she hadn't written, and disappeared when the regular teacher returned. Temporary, forgettable, replaceable. Dr. Vale's widow, Margaret, sat in the front pew, her silver hair perfectly styled despite her grief. Beside her, their son Richard, now in his 40s and heir apparent to the Vale Academy empire, checked his phone discreetly. The family portrait was complete, except for one glaring absence that everyone pretended not to notice. Dr. Vale had built his educational empire from a single school into a network of 12 elite academies across 3 states. Parents paid $40,000 a year for their children to wear the Vale Academy uniform, to carry the prestige that came with the name. Sarah made $30,000 a year when work was available. The service proceeded with military precision. Colleagues spoke of Dr. Vale's vision, his dedication to excellence, his unwavering commitment to educational integrity. Sarah listened to these eulogies and felt a strange hollowness in her chest. She had seen Dr. Vale exactly 7 times in 2 years. Each time, his eyes had passed over her as if she were furniture. Yet something had drawn her here, something she couldn't name or explain. After the service, mourners gathered in the Academy's main auditorium for refreshments. Sarah lingered near the exit, preparing to leave, when a tall man in a gray suit approached her. His voice was formal but not unkind. "I am David Morrison, Dr. Vale's attorney. Could I speak with you privately?" Sarah's heart jumped. Had she done something wrong? Was there some issue with her substitute work? Some complaint she hadn't heard about? "Of course," she managed, though her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. Morrison gestured toward an empty classroom. As they walked, Sarah caught Margaret Vale's sharp gaze following them. The widow's expression was curious, perhaps slightly annoyed. Inside the classroom, Morrison closed the door and turned to face Sarah. His expression was unreadable. "Miss Chen, I need to ask you a rather unusual question. Were you born on the 15th of March, 1987? Sarah blinked. "Yes, but how did you? And your birth certificate lists your parents as unknown." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her adoption was not a secret, but it was deeply private. She had been found as an infant, abandoned at a hospital with no note, no explanation. The social workers had told her the story many times. A baby girl, healthy and beautiful, left by someone who couldn't care for her. "Why are you asking me this?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Morrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope. "Because, Miss Chen, Dr. Vale left specific instructions. If a woman matching your description ever worked for any Vale Academy, I was to locate her immediately upon his death." Sarah felt the room tilt. "I don't understand. Dr. Vale's will contains some unusual provisions. You are requested to be present for the reading tomorrow at 2 p.m. It is being held at the Fairmont Hotel downtown." "But I am nobody," Sarah protested. "I am just a substitute teacher. I barely knew him." Morrison's expression softened slightly. Miss Chen, I have reason to believe that Dr. Vale knew you better than you think. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at the formal invitation Morrison had left with her. The thick cream paper felt foreign in her hands, too expensive, too official for someone like her. She called her adoptive mother Ellen, the woman who had raised her with all the love her biological parents hadn't been able to provide. "Mom, something strange is happening," Sarah began, and told her about the funeral, the lawyer, the mysterious invitation. Ellen was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, honey, I think you should go. Sometimes life has plans for us that we can't see until they unfold. But what if it is nothing? What if it is some kind of mistake? Then you'll know. But what if it is something? What if this is connected to your story, to who you are?" The next day, Sarah chose her best outfit, a navy blue dress she had bought for job interviews, paired with the only professional shoes she owned. She felt underdressed the moment she walked into the Fairmont Hotel's elegant conference room. The same crowd from the funeral had reassembled, but now their expressions were expectant rather than mournful. Margaret Vale sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Richard and his wife, Patricia. Board members filled the remaining seats around the mahogany table. Sarah took a chair near the back, trying once again to disappear. Morrison stood at the front of the room, a thick document in his hands. "Thank you all for coming. We are here today for the reading of Dr. Harrison Vale's last will and testament." He began with the standard bequests, generous donations to educational charities, funding for scholarships, personal items distributed among family members. Richard Vale inherited the family home and a substantial trust fund. Margaret received a lifetime income and the right to remain in the family residence. But then Morrison paused, his expression growing more serious. "We now come to the matter of Dr. Vale's primary asset, the Vale Academy network and all associated properties, endowments, and business interests." The room fell silent. This was what everyone had come to hear. Dr. Vale's instructions regarding this bequest are quite specific. Morrison cleared his throat. "The complete ownership of Vale Academy and all subsidiary educational institutions, valued at approximately $47 million, is to be transferred to Miss Sarah Chen." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Sarah felt as though someone had drained all the oxygen from the room. Her name echoed in her mind, but it didn't sound real, didn't sound like it could possibly belong to her. Margaret Vale was the first to react. She stood slowly, her face pale with shock. "That is impossible. There must be some mistake." Morrison shook his head. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Vale. The will is quite clear." Richard Vale's voice was strangled with disbelief. "Who is she? We don't even know this woman." All eyes turned to Sarah, who felt as small and insignificant as she ever had. I don't understand," she stammered. "This has to be wrong. I am nobody. I am just a substitute teacher." Morrison opened a second envelope, one that had been sealed with wax. Dr. Vale anticipated this confusion. He left a letter to be read aloud. His voice took on a different tone as he began to read Dr. Val's final words. "To those gathered here today, I know this bequest comes as a shock, but I am correcting a wrong that has haunted me for 34 years. Sarah Chen is my daughter. On the 15th of March, 1987, I made the most cowardly decision of my life. I was 26 years old, engaged to Margaret, and my career was just beginning. When my girlfriend Linda told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was not ready to be a father, and I was too selfish to sacrifice the life I had planned. I convinced Linda to give birth in secret. I told her I would arrange for a good family to adopt our child, that it would be better for everyone. But when Sarah was born, Linda changed her mind. She wanted to keep our daughter, wanted us to be a family. I couldn't do it. I was too afraid of losing my reputation, my engagement to Margaret, my future. So I told Linda I would have nothing to do with the child. In my cruelty, I told her that if she tried to contact me, I would deny everything and ruin her life. Linda was alone, frightened, and broke. In desperation, she left Sarah at the hospital and disappeared. I never saw Linda again. I have spent every day since wondering what happened to the daughter I abandoned. Sarah's hands were shaking. The room was spinning around her. Morrison continued reading. For 34 years, I searched for Sarah. I hired investigators, monitored adoption records, waited for any trace of her existence. When a Sarah Chen appeared on the substitute teacher roster 2 years ago, I knew immediately who she was. She has Linda's eyes, Linda's gentle nature, and my stubborn determination. I watched Sarah work with our students. I saw her patience with difficult children, her creativity in the classroom, her dedication even to temporary assignments. She possessed every quality I had spent my career trying to instill in others: integrity, compassion, and quiet strength. I never spoke to her directly because I was a coward. I was afraid she would reject me, afraid she would see through to the selfish man who had abandoned her. But I made sure she was assigned to our best programs, that she worked with our most experienced teachers, that she had opportunities to prove herself. Sarah, if you are hearing this, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man's lifetime of regret. Vale Academy was built on the money I should have spent raising you, on the time I should have devoted to being your father. It belongs to you now, as it always should have. Use it better than I did. Love these students the way I should have loved you. Your father, Harrison. Sarah couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down her face as the truth of her entire life rearranged itself around her. The father she had wondered about, dreamed about, sometimes hated for abandoning her, had been watching her for 2 years, had been close enough to touch. Margaret Vale's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. This is ridiculous. You expect us to believe this fantastic story? Where is the proof? DNA tests, medical records. Morrison reached for a third envelope. Dr. Vale anticipated this challenge as well. He spread several documents across the table: hospital records from Sarah's birth, a private investigator's report tracing Sarah's path through the foster care system, and photographs of a young woman who looked remarkably like Sarah. This is Linda Martinez, Morrison explained, pointing to the photos. She died in a car accident 15 years ago. These documents trace her movements after Sarah's birth, including her hospitalization for severe depression and her eventual death in Arizona. But the most shocking document was a paternity test, conducted secretly using DNA samples Dr. Vale had somehow obtained. The test confirms it, Morrison said quietly. Sarah Chen is Harrison Vale's biological daughter. Sarah stared at the papers scattered before her, at the faces of people who had treated her as invisible for 2 years, at the woman who had been her stepmother without either of them knowing it. Richard Vale's face was red with fury. This is a fraud, some elaborate scheme. She has probably been planning this for years. Planning what? Sarah's voice was stronger than she expected. Planning to work as a substitute teacher for $30,000 a year. Planning to live in a studio apartment and drive a 12-year-old Honda. This is as much a shock to me as it is to you. She stood, her legs unsteady but her resolve growing stronger. I didn't know who my father was. I didn't know anything about Dr. Vale except that he built successful schools and never noticed I existed. If you think I somehow orchestrated this, you are giving me credit for intelligence and resources I've never possessed. Margaret Vale's eyes were cold and calculating. Even if this is true, even if you are Harrison's daughter, you know nothing about running a school. You are not qualified to manage a $47 million enterprise. Sarah looked around the room at the board members, the faculty, the family members who were staring at her with mixtures of shock, resentment, and curiosity. You are right, she said simply. I don't know how to run a business empire, but I know how to teach children. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, underestimated, forgotten. I know what these schools should really be about. She picked up her purse and the documents Morrison had given her. I need time to process this. I'll be in touch about next steps. As she walked toward the door, Richard Vale called out, "You'll never be able to do this. The schools will fail. The board will never accept you. Sarah paused at the door and turned back. Maybe you are right, but I am not the scared, abandoned baby anymore. I am a teacher who has spent 2 years learning how your schools really operate. I've seen the students who struggle, the ones who fall through the cracks, the ones who get labeled as problems instead of getting the help they need. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I've been the substitute, the temporary, the one nobody pays attention to. But that means I've seen things you never notice from your executive offices and board meetings. I've seen what these schools could become. Margaret Vale's face was a mask of controlled rage. This is not over. No, Sarah agreed quietly. It is just beginning. 3 months later, Sarah Chen stood in the main office of Vale Academy's flagship campus, not as a substitute teacher, but as the owner and director. The brass nameplate on the door read, Dr. Sarah Chen. She had completed her doctorate in education the year before, another qualification none of them had bothered to notice. The transition had been turbulent. 3 board members had resigned. Richard Vale had filed a lawsuit challenging the will, which was quickly dismissed when the DNA evidence proved unshakable. Margaret Vale had moved out of the family home with bitter grace, taking only what was legally hers. But Sarah had also brought changes that no one had expected. She increased teacher salaries across all campuses. She created need-based scholarships for students whose families couldn't afford the full tuition. She instituted programs for children with learning differences, children who had previously been quietly encouraged to look elsewhere. The financial projections showed initial losses, but enrollment was actually increasing. Parents were drawn to the school's new reputation for inclusivity and innovation. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Sarah found herself in the same classroom where Morrison had first revealed her identity. She was reviewing applications for the new program she had created, full scholarships for children aging out of foster care. Children like she had been. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ellen, her adoptive mother. Saw the article in Education Weekly about the new programs. Your father would be so proud. Sarah smiled, thinking about the complex truth of that statement. She had 2 fathers now, the one who had abandoned her in fear and regret, and the one who had raised her with love and courage. Both had shaped who she became. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A young girl peered in, one of the scholarship students from the foster care program. Miss Chen, Dr. Chen, I wanted to thank you for the scholarship. My counselor says I might actually get to go to college now. Sarah's heart swelled. You are going to do amazing things, Maya. I can see it. After the girl left, Sarah sat alone in the classroom, surrounded by the empire her father had built on guilt and the legacy she was transforming through love. The substitute teacher had become the permanent solution. The abandoned daughter had found her way home. And sometimes, late at night when she was working in her office, she could swear she felt her father's presence, finally at peace with the choice that had brought them both full circle. The schools now belonged to someone who understood what it meant to be forgotten, to be temporary, to be overlooked. And that made all the difference.